Welcome to Space Marines. This is a video real quick just to talk about how to interpret the scoreboard. Up front, it's pretty intuitive to think higher numbers are good, and that's true. The team with the highest score wins the game. But there's a lot of numbers on here, so I'm joined by a couple Space Marines who are going to help me kind of go over some of the details. Who am I joined by?
Watermelon.
I am Clown Tucker, I think it was, or Sergeant Boosted. I don't know anymore.
Yeah.
Still Bagel.
Yeah. In honor of our guest Slaughtermelon from St. George, or Cedar City, we're pulling up a game from last West Coast of his to kind of interpret. The team with the highest score is going to win, obviously. Whichever team is on top is going to be the one that currently has the highest score. But I think this can be a little deceiving because the team who's currently in the lead isn't always actually winning the game. It should also be noted that when a team gets eliminated, if this is a 2-game match, that team, they get a 10,000 point elimination bonus. So there is situations where you can eliminate the other team and they can outscore you, but you'll still win the game because of the 10K bonus.
Yeah, I think right now is actually a couple of moments ago is a pretty good example of what you were talking about, where the player Meds had 2 targets, which gives him 2,000 bonus points without him having to tag other players.
So now you might think, okay, well, Meds is the best player on the team. He's tagged so many people.
And confirmed.
But the bases, they can really skew the scoreboard and distort reality, I would say. So you can see that the green team is like 3,000 points ahead of the red team, but look at all the targets they have, the little symbols. That means they have 9 out of 12 possible bases compared to 3 out of 12 for the red team. So if you do the math, that means they have about 6,000 extra points, which really are only acquired by tagging the bases. If you take that away, red is actually up by a lot of points, even though they'd have less of a score.
Yeah, and that's one of the other big things is that score is not indicative of, great performance, especially when you look at resupplies. Meds being at 2,142 points means realistically he's shot a couple of people and been shot quite a few times because you lose 20 points every time you get tagged. Mm-hmm. But it's okay that he's got that because the focus that he needs to have as a medic is not his points, but rather his team's lives, right? Mm-hmm. So he may walk out of this game with maybe 3,000 points, and it can feel kind of just like you didn't do anything. But if your team survives and you win because of that, that makes it all the better. And to kind of accentuate this point, Fireball DK on the other team is dead right now at 1,800. He would have had 2,800 without that penalty. But since Meds is still alive, it is very likely that red will win, even though his score doesn't look great, because he has stayed alive and he is able to continue giving lives to the rest of his team. One of the big things that I've been telling people is score is not indicative of performance. While it is a good way to measure it, it's not a perfect way.
When you're commander, your goals you should realistically be scoring the highest on your team every game with exception. Just like Brew is and like I am in this game respectively, we're both the top scoring players on our team. However, it gets a little bit iffy once you put, scouts and heavies. But generally your scouts and heavies should score more than your resupplies. So, in terms of lettering, this would be like C and then some combination of SHS or SSH or HSS and then medic ammo. You see it because some medics play more aggressive and some ammos play more aggressive, so it really just depends on the pair you have.
And something I see with a lot of new players is they will judge their score pretty harshly for coming in like 3rd, 4th, or 5th place when they're playing a role besides medic. I would agree with Slaughtermelon that in general, the commander is almost always at the top, usually followed by the heavy. It can depend on the arena, and then the scouts. But there's a couple things I want to point out. One, every time a commander nukes, they get 500 bonus points. If a commander nukes about 3 to 4 times in a game, that's about 2,000 extra points. And so just because the commander is top scoring, that doesn't always mean they're actually tagging the most people out of everyone on their team, or they're necessarily like racking up the highest hit diff. Also, missiles will give you 500 points each. If a commander or heavy gets off 5 missiles, that's 2.5k extra. So a lot of times you'll see commanders getting up into 10, 12k, but it doesn't mean that they tagged 100 people.
You lose points both getting shot by the enemy team and shooting your own team, or even if your team shoots you. So there's a lot of different scenarios in which you can lose points besides penalties, and even looking at your hit diff, like you were saying earlier, can impact your score a lot heavily without impacting. Well, sorry, I guess that impacts your feelings a lot on your score.
Well, one of my favorite sayings from League is not everyone is the carry. If you have too many people trying to carry the game, you start tripping over one another, and it creates a whole new plethora of problems, right?
Yeah.
And so it's okay to not be the carry. It's okay to be that person who's just taking up a bunch of space and making people look at you, right? You might not be scoring very high, and you might not, be doing really flashy and cool plays, but because you're in those spaces, you can deny people getting points or tags onto your team, and that can be just as important as getting tags, right?
You make a good point. Really, as long as your team won, you can read all the scores and you can kind of interpret a story based on it. If the commander comes out with 12k and everybody else has 6k or lower, then you know that basically everyone was setting up the commander for success. And I would argue it was probably a team effort to do that. The team controlling space, distracting the enemy team while the commander was getting tons of points and dropping nukes. Something I like to look at is when an ammo gets a really high score, that usually means that they were under attack the entire game and they were constantly fighting off attackers.
Or alternatively, it could be that they had a lot of control, so the ammo was able to move a little bit more freely and was able to get a bunch of tags off. It allows the way the game plays out changes the way the scores will look, right? A team that can get a quick elimination onto someone like a heavy or an ammo are going to not score insanely high for all of them, but that then makes more space. So more of your players can score a closer average, right?
Yeah, something we also need to talk about with commanders and their special points are, one of the most important things in the flow of a game is when your commander's nuking, the purpose of that nuke, what's the follow-up on that nuke,
And
So,
kind
for
of how to
example,
read that off of a scorecard.
Yeah, and that's something you can really read off a scorecard, because in a game where the enemy medic is dead and the commander has 3 nukes still, well, those are 9 lives that the enemy team could never get back in that situation. Versus if I have 3 nukes and the enemy medic's at 20 lives, the chance of my entire enemy team getting those lives replenished is fairly high. So I think special points goes a lot hand in hand with lives and shots in the case of something like the ammo carrier,
I would also say one of the other things for people to read, to learn and understand for early reading, is when you're watching a game back like this, the lives and the ammo matter, but also the things people do off of those are important, right? If you are able to get a lot of ground and do a bunch of damage off of nukes, it is much more efficient. And so sometimes you can see, well, I did really well here because I was getting a lot, or sometimes you can see I was back in the resupply. Yes, I see I got a penalty. I'm aware.
I'm just showing them who you are.
Yeah, boosted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sergeant boosted. Papa Tucker
boosted.
in this one. Yeah, Papa boosted in this one. And so it does, there are other things you can read just by watching the scoreboard as well. And so that kind of adds another, how was I doing? And it can help you with the understanding of what the game state looked like. As an example, while we're paused here, I don't have a medic. Most of us are fairly healthy, but my commander is holding on to 2 nukes, and the enemy commander has no nukes in inventory. So this is going to be 6 lives if he pulls it right now, which puts the medic to 3, a scout to 1, and puts the heavy to 6, the ammo to, 8, and it puts them all in a bit more precarious of a situation.
Right.
And so watching scoreboards is a lot of reading numbers, basically. And, you know, it is not ideal that Jidoku has a negative 180 points, because usually if they had both targets, he'd have about 1,820. But on the flip coin, Satyrs has negative 200 points, right? So it's not... It's both of them are getting attacked a lot, and this game, if I had to guess just off of a freeze frame, looks like it's been flip-floppy. A lot of movement, a lot of brawling. Things have not been going according to the plan, because it's usually very rare to see them die like that without their bases. But there's also only 3.5 minutes left. So we can kind of also tell, you know, this has been a bit of a battle. Both commanders, if Cody gets his base, are at 9,000, right? All the scouts are hovering around 5,000 to 6,000. Both heavies are about 4,900, 5,400 if I don't have that penalty. So it's a close game in terms of score. So then the game becomes lives, numbers, right?
So a commander gets a nuke every 20 special points. So this is like a potential 2 nukes, a potential -6 lives on all the people here. And so, like, they have 7 and 9 lives, but you could look at it as a potential 1 and 3 lives. Or maybe in a second we'll see if one of them drops down to 6, then they'll potentially be instantly dead if Cody drops his nuke.
And so, but now, if you pause again, based off of the fact that I can see them getting their targets, being able to read the scorecard is important, because that means they're downstairs, right? Because that's where Loveland's targets are in this arena. And so you can begin to make inferences from that just from watching gameplay, right?
Yeah, you know they're downstairs, which means probably that the other 4 members don't exactly know where their resupplies are, because the resupplies are running around downstairs. If you have any questions, or if you would like to further study scoreboards, shout out to Laserforce Tournament's YouTube channel. Just come on here and you will find a lot of past tournaments that you can watch these scoreboards for and see the legends of the past.
Yep. We also have a couple different Twitches that'll stream them during our members' nights that vary depending on what days they are. So,
yep. Go get them. Keep being a Space Marine. Catch them all.